I woke up at first light. It's a lifelong habit to get up early. When you deal with clocks, you become a precise mechanism. My body, even at 73, still knew its time. 5:30, no alarm clock, no reminders. I slowly slid my feet off the bed, fumbled for my old house slippers. Beatrice gave them to me 8 years ago for Christmas. They're worn out now, but I can't throw them away. They're the last gift she ever gave me. With a slight grunt, I got up and staggered into the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. Gray hair, deep wrinkles, tired eyes. But they still had that attentiveness that a good watchmaker needs. I had always been able to see the smallest details. The house was quiet. Too quiet since Beatrice had gone. It's been 5 years and I still talk to her sometimes, especially in the mornings. It's an old habit. It's a hard habit to break in 52 years of marriage. "Good morning, darling," I murmured as I passed her picture in the hallway. Our house in Enterprise wasn't big or luxurious, an ordinary one-story house with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and an outbuilding I'd converted into a workshop. But to Beatrice and me, it was the whole world. Every corner held memories. I put the kettle on and looked out the window at the morning street. Enterprise was a small town where everyone knew each other. The Greenwoods lived across the street, the Tanner family in the house on the right, the widow Pearl Quinn on the left. We all grew old together on that street, watching children and grandchildren grow up. My breakfast was modest, oatmeal with berries and tea. Beatrice always insisted that I should eat right. After she left, I tried to keep that habit. After breakfast, I headed to the workshop as usual. It was my holy of holies. Tools neatly laid out on the workbench, a few antique clocks were waiting to be repaired. Even though I had retired 7 years ago, having closed my downtown store, I continued to work for regular customers. My fingers are not as nimble as they used to be. My eyesight is failing, but watchmaking is all about patience and precision. And I had enough of these qualities. I put on my special glasses and picked up the pocket watch Mrs. Queen had brought me last week. It had belonged to her late husband, and she wanted me to restore it for her grandson. Painstaking work, but just the kind of work I liked. Turning the tiny screws, I remembered the first time I'd seen Beatrice. It was in the 60s. I had just opened my store. She had brought an old wall clock to fix, an inheritance from her grandfather. I fell in love not only with the clock, but also with its owner, Beatrice, with her soft smile and kind eyes. We were married a year later. Our son Troy was born 2 years later. An only child, Beatrice lost her second in childbirth and we had no more children. Maybe that's why we spoiled Troy so much. I sighed, remembering Troy as a little boy, watching mesmerized as I repaired the clock. He'd ask a lot of questions, and I'd enjoy explaining the construction of each part. At the time, I thought he would follow in my footsteps. But things turned out differently. The ringing of the phone interrupted my thoughts. I reluctantly put my work away and went to answer it, knowing it could only be one person. "Hey, Dad," Troy's voice sounded strained, as it always did when talking to me. "How are you doing in there?" "I'm fine, son, working on Mrs. Queen's watch." "Fiddling with those antiquities again?" There was a slight irritation in his tone. "At your age, it's about time you got some rest." I didn't answer. There was no point in arguing. Troy never understood my passion for watches. "Listen, I have a very important meeting in town this Friday," he continued. "I'm going to come by your place and talk to you about something." "What kind of things?" I asked, feeling vaguely uneasy. "When I see you, Dad. Nothing urgent, just some business." After the short conversation, I went back to the workshop, but I couldn't concentrate. Troy, my only son, had become a stranger. He had visited me less and less since Beatrice's death, and our conversations had become shorter and more formal. Troy worked as a financial analyst for a big company in the next town over. He lived in a fancy apartment, drove an expensive car, and was always dressed to the hilt. He married a woman named Veronica, who didn't seem to like me very much. They didn't have children. It wasn't in their plans. I spent lunchtime leafing through old photo albums. Here's Beatrice and I, young and happy, holding newborn Troy. Here's his first day of school, graduation, university, the wedding. With each picture, the distance between us grew. When Beatrice got sick, Troy came more often, but still not enough. She was fading in my arms, and he was too busy with his career to spend more time with her. I couldn't blame him for that. Such is the modern world. But somewhere deep down, the resentment lingered. After her funeral, Troy suddenly offered to deed the house to both of us. "It's for your own safety, Dad," he explained. "If something happened to you, there'd be less legal trouble." I agreed. Why argue? The house would go to him when I died anyway. And now, 5 years later, I'm still here, living and breathing memories. The mailman brought the letter around 3 in the afternoon. I had just finished working on Mrs. Queen's clock and was about to go into the garden to check on the tomatoes. When I saw the envelope, I immediately knew it was from the bank, a monthly receipt for the mortgage payment. But when I opened the envelope, I froze, rereading the lines over and over. Congratulations, Mr. Holbrook. We are pleased to announce that with your next payment, your mortgage will be paid off in full. Enclosed is a check in the amount of the house, Beatrice and I's house, 35 years of payments, and now it's finally all ours, or rather, mine and Troy's. I sank into the chair, feeling a strange mixture of joy and sadness. Beatrice should have been here to share this moment. We had dreamed of this day for so many years. My thoughts drifted back to when we first bought this house. We were in our 40s. Troy was 14. We'd moved out of the small apartment we'd rented all those years ago. Beatrice planned the garden. I planned the workshop. It was our own little piece of the world, and now, after all these years, the house was finally fully paid for. I took a deep breath. We need to let Troy know. Maybe this news would bring us a little closer together. I dialed his number, but it went to voicemail. I left a message, trying not to sound too excited. Troy, it's Dad. I have good news about the house. Call me back when you can. All evening I felt a strange uneasiness. Something about Troy's impending visit and his desire to talk business alarmed me. He had hinted several times since Beatrice's death that I should consider a nursing home. You'll be taken care of there, Dad. You can't live alone in that big house forever, he used to say. But I didn't want to move anywhere. Here were my tools, my clocks, my memories. Here I felt Beatrice's presence. Before I went to bed, as usual, I wound all the clocks in the house. It was a habit I had kept since my youth. Beatrice had always joked that I cared more about my clocks than I did about myself. In a way, it was true. As I lay in bed, I stared into the darkness and thought about the future, about the house without a mortgage, about the strained relationship with my son, about the ticking time that I had less and less of. Friday morning came all too quickly. I got up at the crack of dawn, as usual, and began preparing for my son's visit. I made his favorite apple pie from Beatrice's recipe, although cooking had never been my strong suit. Tidied up the house, though Troy would hardly notice. He arrived at noon, parking his gleaming sedan outside the house. I watched from the window as he got out of the car, tall, trim, in a business suit. He looked nothing like me. "Hi, Dad," he said, entering the house and looking around with a faint expression of disapproval. "How you doing?" "Good, son. Did you get my message? About the house?" "Yes, I did," he nodded, walking into the living room and sitting down in a chair. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." There was something in his voice that made me tense up inside. I sat down across from him, waiting for him to continue. "You see," Troy began, avoiding looking me in the eye, "I think it's time for us to make some decisions about your future." And in that moment, I realized that something in my life was about to change irrevocably. And I wasn't going to like that something. "I thought we should celebrate the mortgage payment," I said, pouring Troy a fresh cup of coffee. "It's a big deal for me, for us." Troy sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly looking at something on his phone. He only nodded briefly at my words, not even looking up. His jacket was slung carelessly over the back of his chair, his tie loosened, the only signs that he'd allowed himself to relax a little. "You have no idea how much I've been looking forward to this day," I continued, ignoring his coldness. "Your mom and I have always dreamed of having the house all to ourselves. That made him finally get off the phone. Dad, it's just a formality. A piece of paper from the bank, nothing more." He took a sip of coffee and grumbled. "It's too strong." I ignored the remark. Beatrice always said I made the best coffee on Enterprise. It was a ritual for me, as precise as working a clockwork. I thought maybe we could go to Enterprise Corner for dinner. I suggested it. "Remember when Mom and I used to take you there on special occasions?" Something flashed in Troy's eyes, a shadow of a memory perhaps, but it was gone. "I have a 6 o'clock meeting tonight," he cut him off. "I can't stay late." I felt something inside me clench. Of course he doesn't have time. He never has time. Then maybe another day? On the weekend? I was still clutching at the idea like a straw. Troy sighed, putting the phone aside. "Dad, Veronica and I have a lot to do." And then, he paused, "there are more important things to do than celebrate the mortgage payment." I stared at him in silence. The son I remembered as a laughing boy had turned into a cold, calculating man. I didn't know at what point it happened. What could be more important? I asked quietly. For me, this is home, where I spent the best years of my life with your mom, where I raised you. Troy rolled his eyes, a gesture he'd adopted from Veronica. That's exactly your problem, Dad. You're too fixated on the past. These walls, your clocks, your memories. He circled the kitchen. Life goes on. You have to move forward. It's not a fixation, Troy. It's called appreciating what you have. He hummed uncertainly and picked up the phone again. I decided to change the subject. How's Veronica? I asked, though truth be told, I had little interest in my cold daughter-in-law. She's fine. She's working hard right now. And you? How's your work going? For a moment, something changed in his face. There was a tension that hadn't been there before. It's fine, he answered after a pause. The usual difficulties. Nothing special. But I could see it wasn't true. Something was bothering him. I knew my son too well, despite the years of estrangement. If you have any problems, I don't have a problem, he interrupted sharply. And if you did, what could you do? Give advice on the financial market? He said the last words with barely concealed mockery. I remained silent, feeling the old resentment rising inside. Troy had always thought of my profession as something outdated, useless in the modern world, as if my knowledge and skills were worthless compared to his financial operations. We sat in awkward silence for a few minutes. I stared at my son, trying to find in him the features of the little boy I'd taught to recognize the different types of clockwork. Troy stared out the window, clearly wishing he were somewhere else. Actually, he finally said, turning to me, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. Something in his tone made me uneasy. I'm listening. Dad, you're 73. You live alone in a big house, keeping your own hours, rarely going out, he said slowly, as if he were thinking about each word. I'm worried about you. Don't be, I answered dryly. I'm doing fine. You are now. But what about a year from now? 2 years from now? He leaned forward. You're getting older. What if you fall or get sick? Who's going to take care of you? I have neighbors, friends. I'm not a helpless old man, Troy. He sighed like he was talking to a stubborn child. I'm just suggesting you think of a better place. Somewhere where you'll be taken care of by professionals. That's it. Nursing home. Again. No, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere from my house. Dad, be reasonable. Reasonable? I felt anger rising in me. It's reasonable to live where I'm happy, where I have my things, my workshop, my memories. Memories you can take with you, Troy said. Most of your stuff is just junk. Old clocks, tools. Who needs them? I do, I answered. I need them. Troy leaned back in his chair, clearly annoyed. You know what letting go is? Sometimes you have to let go of the past in order to move forward. And sometimes you just have to respect other people's choices, I parried. I'm not moving anywhere, Troy. This is my home. It's fully paid for now, and I'm going to live here as long as I can. He didn't answer, but I saw something like calculation flicker in his eyes. He looked around the room with an appraising gaze, as if estimating the value. Do you know what this house is worth on the market right now? He asked suddenly. 3 times what you paid. The neighborhood has become prestigious. I'm not interested in the real estate market, I replied coldly. I'm not going to sell the house. Even if it would help solve some problems, there it was. He confessed after all. Are you having financial difficulties? I asked bluntly. Troy looked away. Not really a hardship, just temporary difficulties. The market is unstable right now. I've made some bad investments. And you think selling the house is going to solve your problems? It's not just mine. He tried to smile, but it didn't come out sincerely. You'll be better off too. Less worries, more comfort. I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. When had he turned into a man who only saw the family home as a source of money? I thought the house was half yours, I said, remembering how, after Beatrice's death, he'd insisted that we share it. You can sell your share if you need the money. It doesn't work that way, and you know it, Troy cut him off. No one's going to buy half a house that an old man lives in. He used the word old man with such disdain that it made my insides clench. Then you're going to have to find another way to solve your financial problems, I said as calmly as I could, because I'm not selling the house and moving into a nursing home. Troy stood up from the table, a look of frustration on his face. You're too stubborn, Dad. You always have been. You don't think about anyone but yourself. It wasn't fair, and we both knew it. I've spent my whole life thinking of my family first. Beatrice, him. Saving to pay for his education, supported his dreams, even when they meant he'd never carry on the family business. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. I know it is. He was already putting on his jacket, preparing to leave. You cling to the past, this house, to your watch, never thinking for a second that your fixation is keeping others from moving forward. What others, Troy? You? How is my house keeping you from moving forward? He didn't answer the question, instead glancing at his watch. I have to go. I have a meeting. I sighed. You haven't even tasted the pie. Apple pie, like you like it. Some other time, he said, heading for the door. I'm on a diet. We stood in the hallway, two strangers, bound only by blood and the memories one of us was trying so hard to forget. Think about my offer, Dad, Troy said, gripping the doorknob. It's for your own good. Mine too, he added honestly. At least you admit it, I said. He shrugged. Just be reasonable. At your age, it's silly to cling to things. With those words, he walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway. I heard his car start, the gravel crunching under his wheels as he pulled out of the driveway. Back in the kitchen, I sat down at the table and stared at the untouched apple pie. I'd spent all morning making it according to Beatrice's recipe, making sure it was perfect. And now it would go uneaten, symbolic. It was starting to get dark outside the window. I glanced at the clock, 6:30. Beatrice usually started cooking dinner at that time. I heard her voice as clearly as if she were here. Cedric, don't stay in your workshop all day. Help me with the salad. What would Beatrice say about our conversation with Troy today? She'd always been able to smooth things over between us, to find compromises. But now she was gone, and I felt that compromise was impossible. I got up and walked through the house, scrutinizing every room just as Troy had done today. But what I saw wasn't the potential sale amount, but the history of our family. The living room with the worn couch where Beatrice and I watched the evening news. A study with bookshelves filled with books on the history of watchmaking. Troy's bedroom, long ago turned into a guest room but still holding his childhood drawings in a desk drawer. Beatrice and I's bedroom where she spent her last days. And of course, my workshop, the heart of the house, the place where I always felt truly alive. So many hours I spent here, bent over my work table, bringing back to life mechanisms that others thought were hopelessly broken. No, I couldn't give it all up. I couldn't let the house Beatrice and I loved so much be sold to pay off some of Troy's debts. I couldn't let myself be sent to live out my days among strangers, in the sterile rooms of a nursing home. I knew Troy. He wouldn't give up easily. He'd inherited my stubbornness, but he'd channeled it in a very different direction. Back in the kitchen, I cut myself a piece of pie. It wasn't bad, though it wasn't as good as Beatrice's. I ate slowly, thinking about today's conversation and what it might mean for the future. Troy didn't realize that this house wasn't just a structure made of wood and brick. It was a place that held our history, our memories, a place where I could still feel Beatrice's presence. He looked at the house and saw only money. I looked and saw life. And I knew I wouldn't give up without a fight. The bank was quiet. Only the soft hum of the air conditioners broke the silence. I stood at the teller window, feeling the strange solemnity of the moment. The last payment on the house, the 35-year mortgage, was coming to an end. Sign here, please, Mr. Holbrook. The young girl behind the counter smiled, holding out the document to me. And congratulations. It's not often that I get the pleasure of making the last mortgage payment. I took the pen, holding it over the paper for a second. I thought of Beatrice, how happy she'd be now. The house was all ours, just what we'd dreamed of when we'd bought it all those years ago. Thank you, I said, signing my name. This is a big day for me. Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying all these years had finally fallen off my shoulders. Proof that I'd done everything right, provided for my family, fulfilled the promise I'd made to Beatrice. I didn't go straight home. I decided to walk around Enterprise, letting my feet carry me through the familiar streets. The weather was fine, clear skies and a light breeze. The city lived its usual life, young mothers with strollers in the park, retirees on benches, people hurrying about their business. Enterprise had been Beatrice's and my home for over 40 years. She grew up here. I came as a young adult. This is where we met. This is where Troy was born. This is where our entire lives have been spent. I stopped in front of the building that once housed my watch store. It was now a coffee shop, but the sign above the entrance was still there, a small clock that read Holbrook and Son. And son, I'd added when Troy turned 10, dreaming that one day he'd carry on my business. Naive old fool. I returned home in the afternoon, feeling slightly tired from the walk, but in high spirits. Troy's car was in the driveway. I hadn't expected to see him today, especially since our last conversation hadn't ended well. Troy was sitting on the porch, tapping his foot impatiently on the step. A leather folder of papers lay beside him. "Where have you been?" he asked in lieu of greeting. "I called, but you didn't answer." "At the bank," I answered, pulling out my keys. "Making the last payment on the house." Something flashed in his eyes. Impatience? Irritation? "You could have warned me. I've been waiting for almost an hour." "I didn't know you were coming," I shrugged, unlocking the door. "Come on in." He followed me into the house, holding the folder under his armpit. I headed into the kitchen to put the kettle on, but Troy stopped me. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk. Let's do it in the living room." His tone was businesslike, almost like a stranger's. I nodded silently and followed him. We sat across from each other, me in my favorite chair, him on the couch. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Troy began, opening the folder. "And I've decided that we need to move faster than I had planned." "What are you talking about?" "The house. Your future." He pulled out several sheets of paper. "I found a great one for you. Sunny Gardens is a premium nursing home. They have a spare room overlooking the park. I've already organized everything." I stared at him, not believing my ears. "You arranged? Without my knowledge? Without my consent?" Troy continued, as if he hadn't heard me. "They have excellent medical staff, 3 meals a day, entertainment programs. You'll be supervised around the clock." "I'm not moving anywhere, Troy. We've already discussed this." He sighed with feigned patience. "Dad, be reasonable. You're 73. You can't live alone in a house that big." "I can and I will," I said firmly. "And it's not that big." "It's not just that," Troy said in a more serious tone. Veronica and I are in financial trouble. Serious ones." I waited for him to continue. "I invested in a project. It failed. I owe a large sum of money." Troy avoided my gaze. "Selling the house would solve that problem." "So it's all about the money?" I asked quietly. "You want to put me in a nursing home so you can sell our family home and pay off the debt?" "It's not just about money. I'm really worried about you. Sunny Gardens will take better care of you than you can take care of yourself." I looked at my son and saw a stranger in front of me, a man willing to throw his father out of the house to pay off some debt. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not signing those papers, and I'm not moving." Troy's face darkened. "Dad, I'm trying to work this out amicably. But you gotta understand, I don't have a choice. The house is still half mine, and if you don't cooperate, I can take you to court." "You're gonna sue your own father?" I couldn't believe my ears. "If I have to," he said, and I could see the cold determination in his eyes. "I'm not just saying that, Dad. I have legal grounds, and believe me, I'll find a way to prove that you're incapable of living on your own." "That's a lie, and you know it." My voice shook with anger. "I'm fully capable." "But who would believe an elderly watchmaker against a successful financial analyst?" He sounded brutally confident. "Especially if I presented evidence of your, shall we say, absent-mindedness." "What absent-mindedness?" "The kind that's easy to fabricate," he shrugged with a cynical grin. "A couple of witnesses who saw you wandering the street confused, a pot forgotten on the stove, a few bills you forgot to pay." I couldn't believe I was hearing this from my own son, from the boy I taught to ride a bike, who I read bedtime stories to, who I comforted after nightmares. "So that's how far you're willing to go," I said quietly. "To slander your own father." "I'm just doing what's necessary," he straightened. "Sign the papers, Dad. It's what's best for everyone." I stared at the papers he placed in front of me. A contract to sell the house. An application to move to Sunny Gardens. A power of attorney authorizing Troy to handle my finances. All this time he'd been planning not just to evict me, but to gain control of everything I owned. "No," I repeated, pushing the papers aside. "Get out of my house." Troy stood up, his face contorted with anger. "Your house? It's half mine, man. You seem to have forgotten that." He stepped close to me. "And you know what? Enough talk." He turned and walked briskly toward the front door. I followed him, not sure what was going on. "Troy, what are you doing?" He swung the door open and turned to me with a cold stare. "Something I should have done a long time ago. You want a war? You'll get it." I stood in the hallway, still unable to believe what was happening. "What are you talking about?" "I'm saying that as of today, this house is under my control." He held out his hand. "Keys." "What?" "The keys to the house. Give them to me." No way, I took a step back. In 2 quick moves, he was there and grabbed a bunch of keys out of my jacket pocket. Hey! I tried to return them, but Troy dodged easily. I'd always forgotten how much taller and stronger he was. Now listen to me carefully, he said, holding the keys in his hand. You have 2 choices. Either you move to Sunny Gardens voluntarily, and we part peacefully, or I exercise my right as co-owner and kick you out with nothing. You can't do that, my voice trembled. This house... Go away, he interrupted me abruptly. The house is half mine anyway. I'll change the locks tonight. Troy, this is crazy. You can't... I can and I will. He looked at me without a shred of sympathy. Pack your things and go. You've got an hour. He's really crazy, I thought. Or am I crazy for raising a son like that? It's illegal, I said, trying to talk sense into him. You can't just kick me out. Check it out, he grinned. Sue me. See whose will take it. He knew I didn't have the strength or the money for a long trial. He knew that at 73 I couldn't take the stress. 1 hour, he repeated, glancing defiantly at his watch. And I'll be here to make sure you didn't bring anything with you except your personal effects. With those words, he went out onto the porch and closed the door behind him, leaving me alone in the hallway. I stood there stunned by what had happened. I couldn't believe that my own son had just kicked me out of my home, the house I'd paid the last installment on this morning, the house where my whole life had been spent. But I knew I had no choice, at least not now. Troy was determined, and if I refused to leave, it could end up worse. With a heavy heart, I went up to the bedroom and pulled an old suitcase out of the closet. What to take with me? A few sets of clothes, toiletries, a picture of Beatrice that always stood on the bedside table. I went down to the workshop. Troy was standing at the living room window, talking on the phone, watching me. I gathered the most necessary tools, a few parts to repair the watch I was working on, my favorite pocket watch, a gift from my father. All of this I stacked neatly in my suitcase, trying not to show how broken my heart was. As I passed Beatrice's picture in the hallway, I stopped and took it off the wall. This one stays here, Troy's voice sounded behind me. It's your mother's picture, I replied quietly. And my home now. The picture stays. I could have argued, I could have yelled, but I was too devastated. I just nodded and put the picture on the table. Gathering up everything I could carry, I walked out onto the porch. Troy followed me, still talking on the phone. I heard scraps of phrases, something about the price of the property, about potential buyers. He was already planning the sale. Where will you go? He asked me when he was done talking. None of your business, I answered without turning around. Dad, he said, a note of concern in his voice. You realize I'm doing this for both of us, right? You'll be better off at Sunny Gardens. I can take you there right now. I turned around and looked him straight in the eye. I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son would kick me out of the house for money. Your mother would roll over in her grave, Troy's face petrified. Mom would understand. She was always practical. You didn't know your mother at all, I shook my head. Goodbye, Troy. I started down the stairs. Dad, he called out to me. At least tell me where you're going. I need to know you're okay. Why? I grinned bitterly. Are you afraid of being accused of throwing an old man out on the street? He didn't answer, but I could see in his face that I'd hit the mark. Don't worry, I added. I'm not sleeping on a park bench. I have friends. With those words, I walked down the path to the gate, feeling his gaze on my back. I didn't look back. I didn't want him to see the tears that were starting to come to my eyes. Walking down the street with my suitcase, I felt like a stranger in my own neighborhood. A neighbor, Mrs. Tanner, who was watering the flowers, looked at me in surprise. Mr. Holbrook, are you going somewhere? Just a little trip, I lied, not wanting to explain the reality of the situation. When I reached the corner of the street, I stopped and pulled out my cell phone. Troy's number was first on my contact list. I pressed block, then dialed another number. Oliver, it's Cedric. I need your help. As I listened to my old friend answer, I looked in the direction of my house, the house that no longer belonged to me. Troy was wrong if he thought I'd give up so easily. I'd lived long enough to know that even in the most difficult situations, there was always a way out. And if my son decides to play hardball, well, I can teach him a lesson he'll never forget. Oliver Price's house was in the old part of Enterprise, 3 bus stops from my former home. It was a small but well-maintained 1-story house with a wide veranda and a garden full of flowers. Oliver had always had a passion for gardening. I walked up the steps and knocked on the door, feeling oddly awkward. It was the first time in years that I'd been without a place of my own. "Cedric!" Oliver opened the door. "Come in." Oliver was 78, but he looked younger than his years, tall, gaunt, with thick gray hair and bright blue eyes. We'd known each other for 40 years, ever since he'd first brought me an antique pocket watch he'd gotten from his grandfather to repair. Since then, Oliver had become not just a customer, but my closest friend. "I'm sorry to intrude," I said as I entered the house. "I didn't realize I'd have to take advantage of your hospitality like this." "It's nothing," Oliver said, taking the suitcase from me. "You can stay here as long as you need to. It's more fun to spend the days together." After his wife died 10 years ago, Oliver had lived alone. They had no children, so the big house seemed empty. I visited him often, helping with appliance repairs and just keeping him company. "You can use the guest room," Oliver said, leading me down the hall. "The bathroom's down there. I was just about to make dinner. You must be hungry." I nodded, realizing that I hadn't really eaten anything since this morning. The events of the day had crowded out all thoughts of food. "Then go unpack and I'll get dinner," Oliver patted me on the shoulder. "Then you can tell me what happened." The guest room was small but cozy. A single bed, a nightstand, a dresser, and a small desk by the window. There were old framed pictures on the wall. I knew they were Oliver's parents and grandfather. I slowly laid out my few belongings. Clothes took up only one drawer of the dresser. Tools I placed neatly on the desk. The picture of Beatrice, which I'd grabbed before I left, was placed on the nightstand. "We're together again, darling," I whispered, looking at her smiling face. "In someone else's house, though. Over dinner." Oliver had made a nice lasagna. I told him everything that had happened. About the last payment on the house. Troy's sudden appearance with the paperwork. His threats and how he kicked me out. "Damn bastard," Oliver said, pounding his fist on the table. "I'm sorry, Cedric, but your son—" I can't even find the words. "I can't believe he's capable of this," I sighed. "I know our relationship has been strained over the past few years, but to kick his own father out of the house—" "Money," Oliver shook his head. "It changes people, especially people who are used to a certain way of life and suddenly find themselves on the verge of bankruptcy." He was right. I'd long suspected that Troy's financial situation wasn't as shiny as he'd tried to make it seem. There were too many signs. Frequent calls with a muffled voice, constant excuses when I offered to come visit him, nervousness at the mention of his work. "What are you going to do?" Oliver asked, pouring the tea. "First, I need to figure out my legal rights," I answered. "The house is in both our names, but I've been making all the payments. There must be a way to get it back. I know a lawyer, Edwin Phelps. He's a real estate expert. I can arrange a meeting." "I'd appreciate it," I nodded. "What about your things? There are a lot of personal items left in the house, aren't there?" I sighed, remembering all the things I had to leave behind. My watchmaking books, my collection of antique clock movements, my photo albums, Beatrice's memorabilia. "I'm afraid Troy might throw it all away or sell it," I said grimly. "We'll figure something out," Oliver assured me. "Maybe we can get at least the most valuable things." As I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep, thinking about the situation. I was tormented not only by the loss of my home, but also by my son's betrayal. How had we gotten to this point? Where had I gone wrong in raising him? I was also concerned that among the things left behind were important documents, in particular Beatrice's will, which she had made shortly before her death. It was kept in an old secretaire in our bedroom. I'd never told Troy about its contents. I'd never seen the need while I was alive. But now those documents could be key. I remembered that Beatrice had stipulated special terms for the inheritance of the house. She had insisted on including a clause stating that the house could only be sold with my consent while I was alive. Troy knew of the existence of the will, but I doubted he knew its exact contents. There were also financial documents left in the house, including old bank statements and copies of checks. After Beatrice's death, Troy had taken over the administration of part of her inheritance, a small account she kept separate for unexpected expenses. He claimed to have invested that money, but he never provided me with account statements. I hadn't insisted, trusting my son, but now I was beginning to suspect that he might have used the money for his own purposes. In the morning, as promised, Oliver contacted a lawyer he knew. Edwin Phelps agreed to meet us at his office at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. "We were lucky he could make the time," Oliver said over breakfast. "He's usually booked weeks in advance." "I hope he can help," I said, stirring the sugar in my coffee. It's going to be hard to prove anything without the paperwork, though. Don't get discouraged, Oliver encouraged me. There must be a way to solve this problem. I nodded, but inside I was gnawing with worry. Troy wasn't the type to back down easily. If he decided to sell the house, he'd do whatever it took to carry out his plan. Before meeting with the lawyer, I decided to check my cell phone. Although I had blocked Troy's number, he might have left a message on the voicemail. Indeed, there were 3 new messages, all from Troy. The first, recorded last night, sounded irritated. "Dad, this is stupid. You're acting like a child. Call me back. We need to discuss your move to Sunny Gardens. I've already filled out the paperwork." The second, from this morning, was more insistent. "Dad, seriously, pick up the phone. I'm worried. You can't just disappear. I have a meeting with potential home buyers at the end of the week, and I need to get your stuff sorted out." The third message, left just an hour ago, sounded almost threatening. "If you don't show up soon, I'll go to the police. You're an elderly man living alone. It'll look like I care about you. Think about it." "What a creep," Oliver muttered when I let him listen to the messages. "Using your age against you." "He's desperate," I said, feeling a strange mixture of anger and pity for my son. "He needs money, and he'll do anything." "All the more reason to get legal help," Oliver concluded. "Let's go to Phelps." Edwin Phelps' office was located in the center of Enterprise, in an old brick building that used to be a tobacco factory. The lawyer himself was a gaunt man in his 60s, with an attentive look from beneath his thin-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Holbrook, Mr. Price," he shook hands with us, pointing to the chairs in front of his desk. Oliver briefly outlined the situation over the phone, but I'd like to hear the details directly from you, Mr. Holbrook. I gave him a detailed history of the house, how Troy had become co-owner after Beatrice's death, and recent events. "Do you have copies of the deed to the house?" Phelps asked, making notes in his notebook. "Unfortunately, no. Everything was left in the house," I said with my hands folded. "Troy kicked me out rather sudden." "And your late wife's will?" "Also in the house, in the bedroom secretary." Phelps tapped his pen thoughtfully on the desk. "The situation is difficult but not hopeless," he said at last. "If your wife really stipulated special conditions for the sale of the house in her will, it could be a key point. But without documentation, proving it will be difficult." "Could Troy sell the house without my consent?" I asked directly. "Technically, as a co-owner, he has the right to dispose of his share. But he can't sell the whole house, especially if there are restrictions in the will," the lawyer replied. "The problem is that without documents, we cannot prove the existence of these restrictions." "So I need to return these documents?" "Exactly," Phelps nodded. "Without them, our position will be very weak." On the way back to Oliver's house, I thought about the situation. The documents must be returned. But how could I do that if Troy had probably changed the locks by now? "What are you thinking about?" Oliver asked, watching my face. "Trying to figure out how to get the documents out of the house," I answered. "And something else." "What's that?" "I think that Troy didn't just suddenly decide to sell the house. He needs the money, obviously, but why now? Something happened in his life that put him in a desperate situation." "And you want to find out what it is?" "Yes," I nodded. "Perhaps there are other documents in the house that might shed some light on his financial situation. I remember that after Beatrice died, he took over her savings, said he was investing them, but he never showed me the statements. Do you think he might have squandered that money?" "I don't know, but I want to find out." Oliver thought for a moment, then his face brightened. "I have an idea how we can get into the house," he said. "Do you remember Mrs. Queen, your neighbor?" "Sure," I nodded. "Pearl lives in the house to the left of mine. Her grandson, Nate, works for an alarm company. They deal with locks a lot. Maybe he could help." "You're suggesting a home invasion?" I was shocked. "Not breaking in," Oliver objected. "Just gaining access to your own home that you've been illegally kicked out of. That's different," I wondered. On the one hand, the idea seemed risky. On the other, I really needed those documents, and a chance to find out exactly what was going on with Troy. "Besides," Oliver added, "we could use this time to make Troy a little nervous. Don't answer his calls. Let him worry, not knowing where you are or what's wrong with you." "You think he's worried?" "Judging by his texts, yeah. He's afraid you might make some kind of move against him." "He's right to be," Oliver grinned. "Sometimes the best strategy is to make your opponent nervous, waiting for you to make a move. I never considered Troy an opponent. He was my son, my flesh and blood. But after what he did to me, I was beginning to think Oliver was right. Maybe Troy really should be taught a lesson." "Okay," I decided. Let's try to contact Mrs. Queen's grandson. And for now, I won't take Troy's calls. Let him worry for a while. Great, Oliver smiled. In the meantime, I'll talk to some of our mutual acquaintances. Enterprise is a small town, and news travels fast. If people find out that Troy kicked his elderly father out of the house for money, it won't do him any good. I don't want to take my family's problems public, I grumbled. Sometimes public opinion is a powerful weapon, Cedric, Oliver said, especially in a town like ours. Troy might be a big shot in his financial company, but here he was, still the son of Cedric Holbrook, a respected watchmaker. I didn't answer, but deep down I knew he was right. If the whole town knew what Troy had done, it would be harder for him to act with impunity. That evening, Oliver called Nate, Mrs. Queen's grandson, and arranged a meeting. Nate agreed to help, but he said he wouldn't be able to make it for a couple days. Well, I said, putting the phone away. Troy has time to be nervous. To prove my point, the phone rang again. It was Troy, for the 5th time that day. I didn't answer, letting the call go to voicemail. A plan was starting to form in my head. Get the paperwork back, find out what was going on with Troy, and use that information to get my house back. And maybe teach my son a lesson about how some actions have consequences. The week at Oliver's house was relatively quiet. I helped a friend with the garden, repaired a few hours for his acquaintances, and gradually got used to the new rhythm of life. But thoughts of the house never left me for a minute. I imagined Troy walking through the rooms, appraising things, planning to sell, perhaps already throwing out what he considers unnecessary junk. In keeping with our plan, I didn't return my son's calls, and he did call, several times a day. The voice messages evolved from annoyed to concerned. Dad, this isn't funny anymore. Pick up the phone. Where are you? I stopped by a few people you know, no one's seen you. Look, if you think this is going to prove anything, you're wrong. The house will still be sold. The last message left last night sounded almost desperate. Dad, I'm seriously worried. If you don't show up by tomorrow, I'm going to go to the police. He's nervous, Oliver said when I let him listen to the tape. He's afraid you're up to something. Or really worried, I shrugged. Yeah, Oliver snorted. So worried that he kicked you out of your own house. Don't be fooled, Cedric. He's just afraid that his plan to sell the house will fall through. I knew Oliver was right, but somewhere deep inside, I still had hope that there was something of the caring boy Beatrice and I had raised in Troy. On Wednesday, exactly a week after my banishment from home, Nate Quinn finally arrived in Enterprise. He was a sturdy young man of about 25 with a friendly smile and confident movements. I remembered him as a teenager, when he'd come to visit his grandmother on vacation. Mr. Holbrook, he shook my hand. Grandma sends her love. She's very upset about what happened. Thank you, Nate, I said, slightly embarrassed, realizing that news of my exile had already spread through the city. And thanks for agreeing to help. Well, technically, it's not exactly legal, he grinned. But Grandma said Troy did something even more illegal, so it's okay. We agreed that we'd break into the house the next morning when Troy would probably be at work. Just keep it quiet, Nate warned us. And if anyone asks, I'm just helping you get some personal items with your son's permission. Sure, Oliver and I agreed. That evening, Oliver returned with news. You wouldn't believe what's been going on in town, he said, sitting down in his chair. Troy's been going out of his way to find you. He went to the Jenkinses, to Old Man Murphy, even to Pastor Simon's. What did he say? That you were missing, that he was worried, acting like a concerned son, Oliver snorted. No one believed him, of course. The rumor that he'd kicked you out of the house had traveled all over town. I sighed. Enterprise had always been like that, a small town where news traveled faster than the wind. But that's not all, Oliver continued. Do you know who came to see Pearl Quinn today? Troy? That's right. He asked if she'd seen you, if she knew where you might be, and then he asked if she'd noticed anything unusual lately, like if anyone had come into the house. I got suspicious. Do you think he suspects something? I don't know, but he's obviously concerned about more than just your disappearance. Pearl said he seemed very nervous, and she also noticed that there were some people coming to the house, potential buyers. That confirmed our fears. Troy was really in a hurry to sell the house. It was all the more important to get the documents as soon as possible. In the morning, as planned, we met Nate at Pearl Queen's house. It was about 9 o'clock, and Troy should have left for work by now. No car at the house, Nate said, peering cautiously out from behind the hedge. I think he's gone. We crossed the street and walked toward my house, or rather, the house that had been mine a week ago. They did change the locks, Nate said, looking at the front door. But it's a standard cylinder, nothing complicated. He pulled some tools out of his bag and set to work. A couple minutes later, the door was open. Just keep it quiet, Nate reminded him. And I'll wait for you outside. I'd rather not be involved in the actual process. Oliver and I went inside. It looked almost exactly as I remembered it, but something was subtly different. Maybe the air was different, or the light was falling differently. Or maybe it was just the knowledge that I wasn't the boss anymore that made everything seem foreign. Where do we start? Oliver asked. The bedroom, I answered. Beatrice's will should be in the secretary. We went upstairs. The bedroom looked untouched. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. The clock I had given Beatrice for our 20th anniversary still stood on the bedside table. The secretary was in the corner of the room, an antique mahogany one with many drawers and compartments. Beatrice had loved it for its versatility. I opened the top drawer, then the second, then the third. There were no documents. Shit, I muttered. Troy must have found them by now. Are you sure they were here? Positive. Beatrice always kept important papers in this secretary. Oliver looked around the furniture thoughtfully. Are there no secret compartments in it? I grinned. This isn't a spy movie, Oliver. And yet, he insisted, these old secretaries often had hidden drawers. I examined the secretary more closely. Indeed, there was a panel at the bottom that seemed merely decorative. But if one knew the secret, I pressed a certain spot and the panel moved slightly. A secret compartment, and in it, a folder with documents. Damn, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. She was always thoughtful. There were several documents in the folder. Beatrice's will, some bank statements, insurance policies. I quickly looked through the will. Yes, there was a clause prohibiting the sale of the house without my consent. Got it. I showed Oliver the page. Great, he nodded. Now let's look for something about Troy's financial affairs. You said he managed Beatrice's money? Yeah, a small amount. He must have kept the records here somewhere. We went down to the office. Everything looked pretty much untouched there too, except for a few new folders on the desk. I walked over to them and froze. The top folder said, House for sale, offers. When I opened it, I saw several printouts from realtors with estimates of the house's value, contacts for potential buyers, and even a tentative contract of sale dated for tomorrow. Troy was really in a hurry. Look at this. I handed the folder to Oliver. He was going to sign the contract tomorrow. Oliver whistled as he looked through the documents. For that much? That's twice the real value. I guess the neighborhood is really starting to appreciate, I murmured. We continued our search and soon found another folder signed Investments, Mom's Inheritance. It contained statements of funds, account statements, and a few letters from the bank. Looking through them, I began to realize what had happened. Troy had indeed invested Beatrice's money, but not in safe assets, but in some risky project that had completely failed. What's more, he had taken out a loan secured by that investment, which he was now unable to repay. And judging by the dates, the problem started about 6 months ago. That's why he needs money so urgently, I said, showing the documents to Oliver. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. He's on the verge of bankruptcy, and possibly even criminal prosecution for misuse of the funds entrusted to him. And he decided to solve his problems by selling your house. Oliver shook his head. It was ironic. You'd worked your whole life to get him an education, and he was using his financial knowledge to steal from his own father. I didn't answer, feeling only a heaviness in my heart. Whatever Troy's actions were, he was still my son. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt guilty that I hadn't raised him better. We should get going, Oliver reminded me, glancing at his watch. Nate's waiting. I nodded, gathering my papers. Suddenly, another folder lying off to the side caught my eye. It said, Sunny Gardens, contract. Opening it, I saw a contract for nursing home placement, already signed by Troy on my behalf, with a forged signature. Attached to it was a medical report stating that I was suffering from the early stages of dementia and needed constant care. I didn't recognize the doctor's signature, probably a forgery too. He'd thought of everything, I muttered, showing the papers to Oliver. He was going to declare me incompetent so he could take full control of the house and my finances. Bastard, Oliver scolded. I'm sorry, Cedric, but your son... I know, I interrupted him. Let's just get the papers and go. We gathered up everything we could find and headed for the exit. I stopped in the hallway, looking around at the house I might have seen for the last time. So many memories these walls held. Are you okay? Oliver asked, noticing the look on my face. Yeah, I nodded. I'm just saying goodbye. We walked outside where Nate was waiting for us. Everything okay? Did you find what you were looking for? Yeah, thanks, Nate. I shook his hand. You've been a big help. We were about to leave when I noticed a familiar car turning onto our street. Shit, I whispered. It's Troy. Quickly, to Grandma's, Nate commanded, and we hurried toward Pearl Quinn's house, hiding behind the hedge just as Troy's car pulled up in front of the house. From the living room window of Mrs. Queen's house, we watched Troy get out of the car. He looked exhausted, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, stubble on his face, not like the usually impeccable financial analyst. He looks like he hasn't slept in days, Oliver said. He's really worried, I said, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity. We watched Troy go to the door and pull out his keys. Then he froze, noticing something. Apparently evidence of our intrusion. He looks around, then quickly enters the house. I hope he doesn't realize he's missing papers right away, I muttered. Even if he did, what could he do? Oliver shrugged. Report to the police that someone had stolen the papers that proved his fraud? Pearl Quinn, a short woman in her 70s with shrewd eyes, brought us tea. So this is where you've been hiding, Cedric, she said, setting the cups on the table. The whole town's buzzing. Troy's been running around looking for you. I know, Pearl, I sighed. I'm sorry I got you into this. It's nothing, she said. After what he did, it's the least we can do. By the way, she lowered her voice, he's been going to all the neighbors, asking about you. And not just neighbors. He's been to the police, the hospital, even the morgue. The morgue? I choked on my tea. Yes, he must have been seriously afraid that something had happened to you, Pearl grinned, or that you'd found out about his machinations and were going to do something about it. What else did he say? Oliver asked. That you'd left after the fight, that he was worried about your health. He tried to make it sound like you'd decided to leave and he was just worried, Pearl snorted. No one believed him, of course. Everyone on Enterprise knows how much you love your home. You would never leave of your own free will. I was touched by how well my neighbors and friends knew me. It's hard to hide things in a small town, but the support is also stronger here. What are you going to do now that you have your papers? Pearl asked. I'm going to see a lawyer, I answered. We'll see what he says. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. We all froze. Through the curtain, I saw Troy standing on Mrs. Queen's doorstep. Shit, Oliver whispered. Did he suspect something? Cedric, Oliver, go to the kitchen, Pearl commanded. Nate, you stay here and be my visiting grandson. Oliver and I hurried into the kitchen, and Pearl went to open the door. Mrs. Queen, good afternoon, we heard Troy's voice. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you something. Of course, Troy. Pearl's voice sounded perfectly calm. Come on in. Thank you. Oh, you have company? My grandson, Nate. He's here to visit me. Nate, this is Troy, our neighbor's son. Nice to meet you, Nate said. Grandma's told me all about you. Likewise, Troy sounded wary. Mrs. Queen, did you notice anything unusual this morning? Outside my house? No, nothing, Pearl answered innocently. Why? I think someone was breaking into the house, Troy said. You didn't see anyone suspicious? No, darling, I've been busy with Nate all morning. We made breakfast. Then he helped me in the garden. I see, Troy sounded disappointed. Have you seen my father lately? Cedric? No, not since he left home. Pearl's voice had a steely note of steel in it. You still haven't found him? No, Troy sighed. I've been all over town. No one's seen him. I'm really starting to worry. Maybe we should go to the police, Pearl suggested. I've already been there. They said a grown man has the right to go wherever he wants and doesn't have to report his whereabouts to anyone. Troy sounded annoyed. But if something happened to him, or if he found out something, Pearl interjected. What do you mean? Troy's voice became strained. Nothing in particular, dear. Just thinking out loud, Pearl replied innocently. You know how people talk. Word travels fast in a small town. What rumors? Troy was obviously nervous. About you kicking your father out of the house to sell it, that you forged some documents, that you're in financial trouble, Pearl said casually, as if she were discussing the weather. But those are all rumors, of course. I'm sure you did the right thing. There was a long pause. I must go, Troy said at last. If you see my father or know anything about him, please let me know. Of course, darling, Pearl replied sweetly. Have a good day. The next morning I sat in Edwin Phelps' office with all the documents I had found laid out before him. The lawyer was looking through them carefully, making notes in his notebook. His face remained impenetrable, with only occasional eyebrows raised in surprise. Well, Mr. Holbrook, he said at last, putting aside his pen, I must admit that we have a very strong position. Your wife's will expressly forbids the sale of the house without your consent. Moreover, these documents, he pointed to a folder containing evidence of Troy's financial fraud, indicate possible fraud on his part. What are we supposed to do now? I asked, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. I suggest we act decisively, Phelps replied. Right now, we will prepare a statement to the court about the wrongdoing of your son and get an injunction against the sale of the house. At the same time, I'll contact the bank where your late wife's savings were kept and initiate an investigation into Troy's actions. Is that necessary? I was still hesitant. Despite everything Troy had done, he was still my son. I'm afraid so, Phelps said firmly. Your son not only kicked you out of the house, but he falsified medical documents in an attempt to have you declared incompetent. Those are serious offenses. Besides, according to these papers, he's already made arrangements to sell the house. If we don't stop him now, tomorrow might be too late. I sighed and nodded. Phelps was right. As painful as it was to admit, Troy had crossed the line, and now he had to face the consequences of his actions. All right, I said. Do what you have to do. Phelps got to work immediately. Within an hour, he had the necessary documents drawn up and sent them to the court. Then he made several calls, to the bank, where Troy conducted transactions with Beatrice's money, and to the realtor, with whom he negotiated the sale of the house. I think we should pay a visit to your son, Phelps said after the negotiations were over. It would be better to solve this case directly without waiting for the court proceedings. Are you sure? I wasn't ready for a face-to-face confrontation with Troy. Absolutely. The strength of our position is that we act openly and decisively. Besides, he smiled, your son's been on his feet looking for you. It would be rude not to show up in person. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Phelps and I pulled up in front of my house. Troy's car was parked in the driveway. Apparently, he'd taken time off work to attend to the sale of the house. Or maybe he was still searching for his missing father. Phelps knocked firmly on the door. A few seconds later, it opened, and Troy appeared on the doorstep. When he saw me, he froze with a look of shock on his face. Dad? His voice shook. Where have you been? I've been looking all over town for you. Hello, Troy, I answered calmly. Let me introduce you to Mr. Phelps, my lawyer. Lawyer? Troy shifted his gaze to Phelps. His face changed, shock replaced by wariness. Why do you need a lawyer? I think we'd better discuss this internally, Phelps said. If you don't mind, Mr. Holbrook Jr. Troy reluctantly stepped aside, letting us into the house. We walked into the living room, which looked untidy, with dirty cups on the table, papers scattered on the couch, and the smell of worn clothes in the air. Not like the usually tidy Troy. Where have you been? Troy asked, ignoring Phelps. I've been worried sick. Really? I couldn't contain my sarcasm. Strange concern for a man who kicked his father out of the house. You left on your own, Troy objected. After our fight, I just wanted you to think about moving to a place where you'd be taken care of. There's no need to continue this play, Mr. Holbrook, Phelps intervened. We have documents confirming your true intentions. What documents? Troy turned pale, his eyes darted around the office. For example, your contract with the Sunny Gardens nursing home, where your father's signature is forged. Phelps pulled papers out of his briefcase. Or say, a fake medical report saying he was incapacitated. Troy sat up, his face turning ash gray. Did you search my house? He asked hoarsely. Your house? Phelps interjected. According to Mrs. Beatrice Holbrook's will, which we also found, the house could only be sold with the consent of her husband, that is, Mr. Cedric Holbrook. Were you aware of this clause? Troy was silent, his hands trembling slightly. Furthermore, Phelps continued, we have evidence of your financial manipulation of your mother's inheritance. You used the funds entrusted to you for risky investments without the consent of their rightful owner, and then, when the project failed, decided to compensate for the loss by selling the house. That's not true, Troy objected weakly. I was acting in my father's best interest. By kicking him out of his own house? Phelps shook his head. I'm afraid the court won't share your view, especially considering the forged documents. What do you want? Troy asked after a pause. Justice, I answered, looking my son in the eye. I want to go back to my house, and I want you to return what's left of your mother's money. Otherwise? Troy tried to maintain a semblance of control over the situation. Otherwise, we'll go to court, Phelps said, with charges of fraud, forgery of documents, an attempted misappropriation of real estate. Given the evidence we have, you risk not only your reputation, but your freedom. Troy was silent, comprehending what he'd said. I could see the emotions changing in his eyes: fear, anger, despair. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way, he said finally. I was in trouble, big trouble. I invested my mom's money in a project that seemed like a win-win, but it went wrong. Then I took out a loan, thought I'd fix it, but I just made it worse. Now the debt collectors call every day. The bank threatens to foreclose. Veronica's gone, he stammered. I was desperate. So I decided to kick my own father out of the house to save my own skin, I finished for him. I thought it was best for everyone, Troy muttered. You'd get care in a good place, and I'd be able to pay off my debts. Not at my expense, I said firmly. Not at the cost of my house, my memories, my life. There was a heavy silence in the room. Troy looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his gaze blank. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. So, Phelps broke the silence. Here's what we propose. You immediately relinquish all claims to the house and transfer full ownership to Mr. Cedric Holbrook. You return the remaining funds from Mrs. Holbrook's inheritance. In exchange, we won't press criminal charges against you. And if I refuse? Troy asked, but there was no confidence in his voice. Then the police officers will pay you a visit tomorrow morning, Phelps answered simply. And given the size of your financial fraud, you risk spending a lot of time behind bars. Troy covered his face with his hands. He looked utterly broken, and for a moment I felt a prick of conscience. But then I remembered how he'd taken my keys from me, how he'd kicked me out of my own house, how he'd been willing to declare me incompetent for money. Okay, Troy finally said. I'll do it. Phelps nodded contentedly and pulled out the documents he'd already prepared. Sign here and here, he said, pointing to the marked places. This is a waiver of rights to the house and an undertaking to return the funds within 30 days. Troy silently signed the papers. Keys, please, I said, holding out my hand. He pulled a bunch out of his pocket and handed them to me, avoiding my gaze. I'll pack, he mumbled. Take your time, Phelps said, but the house should be vacant by tonight. We left Troy alone in the living room and went out onto the porch. I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and bitterness. You did well, Mr. Holbrook, Phelps said. Not everyone would have had the guts to stand up to his own son. I take no joy in it, I answered honestly. I understand, but sometimes you have to stand up for justice, even if it hurts. You did the right thing. I nodded, but my heart remained heavy. I got my house back, but I lost my son. Although, to be honest, I'd lost him much sooner. By late afternoon, Troy had packed his things and left without a word of goodbye. I stood at the window, watching his car drive away from the house, and thought about how strange life had gotten. How the man I loved most in the world could betray me so cruelly. The next morning, a locksmith arrived to change the locks. While he worked, I walked around the house, making sure everything was in place. Troy had packed up some of my stuff, judging by the empty shelf space. He'd planned to take some of my valuables, but most of my watch and tools were still intact, as were photo albums and Beatrice's personal effects. In town, the news spread quickly. Neighbors stopped by one to express their support and joy at my return. Pearl Quinn brought apple pie. George Tanner offered to help get the house in order. Pastor Simon stopped by just to shake hands. We knew justice would be served, Pearl said. This kind of thing doesn't go away in the Enterprise. I appreciate your support, I replied, touched by the attention. What will happen to Troy? The pastor asked. He's your son, no matter what. I sighed, not knowing what to say. What's going to happen to Troy? He'd lost his home, his wife, probably his job. His financial problems hadn't gone anywhere, and his reputation on Enterprise was hopelessly tarnished. I don't know, I answered honestly. He's a grown man and he has to deal with his own problems. I can't trust him anymore. Maybe in time, the pastor started. Maybe, I interrupted, not wanting to give false hope even to myself. But some things can't just be forgotten or forgiven. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat in my workshop, taking apart an old pocket watch. The mechanism was complicated, many parts rusted or bent from time. I worked slowly, methodically, enjoying the familiar process. This watch could be repaired, broken parts replaced, rust cleaned, lubricated. But some things couldn't be repaired. I thought of Troy, of him as a little boy sitting next to me in this very workshop, watching my work with admiration. When and how had I lost him? Maybe when I let him leave to study at a prestigious university where he acquired new values and ambitions. Or when Beatrice died, severing the last thread that bound us together. Or maybe the seed of betrayal had always been in him, just waiting to happen. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. I glanced at the screen. Troy's number. My finger hovered over the answer button. What could he say? What could I answer? Were there words that could heal such a wound? I decided not to answer. Let Troy live with his choices as I would live with mine. If someday he truly repented, if he realized the depth of his betrayal, perhaps then we could start talking. But not now. Right now, the wound was too fresh. I went back to work on the watch, replacing broken parts, cleaning the movement, adjusting the accuracy. All required concentration and patience, qualities I had always valued and tried to teach my son. A few hours later, the clock was ticking in my hands again, counting down the seconds with amazing accuracy for such an old mechanism. I looked at it and thought about time, about its relentless march forward, about how it changes people and relationships. Some clocks can be repaired, even if they seem hopelessly broken, but it takes the right parts and a sincere desire to fix the breakage. I didn't know if Troy had that desire, and I wasn't sure if I myself had the right parts left to repair our relationship. I placed the clock on the workbench and stood up, feeling fatigue in every cell of my body. Tomorrow would be a new day. I will live in my home again, work in my workshop, walk the streets of Enterprise saying hello to my neighbors. Life will go on as the clock continues to tick. But the hands never turn back, and some moments in time are irretrievably lost, as are some relationships. Before going to bed, I went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at Beatrice's picture. "We're home again, darling," I whispered. But the price was high, too high. Outside the window, dusk was fading, turning the familiar outline of the garden into blurred shadows. I went to the window and pulled back the curtains, shutting out the outside world. Tomorrow I would have to talk to the locksmith about new locks for all the doors, sturdy locks that wouldn't be easy to open. I lay in bed, listening to the ticking of the old wall clock, a rhythmic, soothing sound, a reminder that life goes on no matter what, even when some parts of it are hopelessly broken.